Some Missouri lawmakers want the public to have more of a say in who oversees public libraries. A bill got initial approval today that would have citizens elect members of local public library boards. Our Missouri Capitol Bureau Chief Joe McLean hears from the sponsor and critics.
The sponsor of this bill says he was motivated by recent concerns of pornography being available in public libraries. While opponents say those concerns are unfounded and that this is just a continuation of culture war politics.
I think the reality is library boards are already politicized. I think if you look at any major news outlet in the last 6 months to a year, people all across the state are frustrated about how libraries are being run.
O'Fallon Republican Tony Lavasco says he wants to make sure citizens have more of a say in who oversees their community's public libraries.
All this does is let people have a say in who gets to represent them in the library boards, both for the curation of content and also how their tax dollars are spent. It's no different than any other government.
Right now, elected city council members or county commissioners appoint library board members, but supporters of this bill say libraries are funded publicly, so their boards should be subject to direct democracy. Under Lavasco's bill, approved by a House committee Wednesday, board members would be elected to 4-year terms, and the cost of the elections would not fall on the library itself. Opponents say this policy is just more rage farming from Republicans, who they accuse of trying to capitalize on public mistrust of institutions.
If that takes place, then yeah, there is going to be some political things going on there.
State Representative Gretchen Bangert, who is running for St. Louis County Council, voted no on the bill, saying it would disincentivize many good candidates.
These folks would have to run basically a campaign with 1 million people on the ballot to work for a position or volunteer, be in a position that's unpaid. They're doing this out of the goodness of their heart and the knowledge that they have about libraries.
Another main concern is that politicizing library boards will only attract the most radical and extreme candidates and scare off the moderate, rational ones. If no one steps up to run for an open library position, Lavasco's bill would allow that position to be filled by appointment like it is now. In Jefferson City, Joe McLean, WGEM News.